we're going to put the spotlight on diversity. If we haven't met yet, I'm Debbie Bola, and I'm Shared Expertise's editorial director. And in both of our publications, CR Magazine and HR Today, we cover diversity. So I'm sure many of you read the headlines about Intel's billion-dollar investment. And today, Rosalind Hundal is here to speak about the company's details, strategies, and goals. So please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Oops, lost my shoe. That's never happened before. It's because I'm from California, we have no water. None.
There you go.
No water. Okay, so I've got either the best slot or the worst. I'm standing between you and maybe not coffee, but some cocktails. And a little bit about my journey at Intel. So I actually started Intel 19 years and 2 weeks ago as a low-level community relations manager, and I actually got put literally into a new job 2 weeks ago to the day as Intel's new vice president of corporate affairs and president of our foundation. So I'm one of you now. But as our CEO said, but you're not going to get away from diversity because you're going to continue to serve with me on this executive committee because all this stuff connects anyway. So one of my messages that I want to do in my short time with you is to talk about the journey. The data is all out there, but talk about how I believe that the transparency of data is going to transform how we look at how we treat our own people inside of the workplaces, and how I do believe that over time the convergence of this issue with corporate social responsibility, with human rights, and a variety of things are going to go on, are going to continue to be a combined narrative. So what did we do, right? And why did we do it? So if you think about it from a business standpoint, and we've been talking about the business case in diversity and inclusion pretty much for my entire career in tech, right? We've always said all the right things. We've used research. We've talked about diverse teams. But when Intel really stepped back and looked at it, that's our vision. If it's smart and connected, it's best with Intel, and that's all around the world. And all you have to do is look at what's happening with the convergence of demographics around the world. And as Moore's Law has brought technology down to a personal device and how the cost has gone down, there's an explosion of who actually wants technology around the world. And so we're having to design for a consumer base that looks very different than when I started technology 19 years ago, and it really was still a business-focused consumer for us. And so why did this man kind of early in his tenure, were you guys kind of surprised? Right, that a CEO pretty early in his tenure would get up on stage, not at a diversity conference, not at a room of people who expected it, but the CES, the Computer Electronics Show, where we roll out our strategy for the year and talk about diversity and inclusion. Many of you may have followed the year before when he talked about conflict-free. So what he's done is he's set a stage that says this is not just about one particular piece, but this is about where I want to take the company. And the role of diversity is crucial here. It is absolutely crucial. So he truly believes that in order to deliver products that are smart and connected all around the world, we can no longer do it if we don't get serious about diversity and inclusion. And why are demographics important? Because if you don't have representation inside of all of your design groups, inside of all of your meetings, then you're going to miss. You're going to miss out. And what's interesting about that is we're an engineering company. 88% of the people we've hired this year are engineering technical talent. When we say technical at Intel, we mean technical. Engineers, computer sciences, people with mechanical, chemical, industrial, electrical engineering, computer science. We are talking about hardcore computer science and engineering. And why does that matter? I get asked a lot of questions about, well, an engineer is just an engineer. Well, actually not. Because what we're finding is when you are engineering for a diverse consumer and you don't have that life experience in the room, you're going to forget something. You're going to miss out. William Wood talked about paying the opportunity costs. We would have paid this opportunity cost if we hadn't finally put a female engineer in the room with a group of male engineers designing for a woman's wearable. Yes, people, we had a group of male engineers in rooms designing for a women's wearable. Okay, most of you are shaking your heads. We should have figured that out, I know. But you know what? Sometimes brilliance isn't as brilliant with velocity as we'd like it to be. Because they're sitting there designing for this wonderful, great wearable and figuring out how to charge it so they don't burn our wrists. Forget the fact that it wasn't as beautiful as I wanted. They were trying to figure out this great engineering solution. Great engineers. Ladies, what do we do with our jewelry when we get home? Where do we put it? Maybe a bowl. That was the charging bowl. Think about what would have been the missed opportunity. So that's why it's important to us. And the reason why I say that is once your CEOs and once industry CEOs really get this, this will become a huge agenda. And those of you working in CSR, it's going to hit you like a bolt of lightning, because then they're going to want results. You're the ones that have taught us about transparency. And the minute you go transparent with your workforce data, trust me on this one, the minute you go transparent, then you are basically allowing your entire constituency to grade you every day on this issue. It is going to impact the CSR human rights world, in my opinion, in big ways beyond the tech industry. So at Intel, where we're focused is pretty typical. This is kind of your, one-on-one lesson about what we do. And it's not all that we do, but these are the segments that we really have focus efforts, people over it, goals, objectives. And that's pretty typical. I've looked at kind of who's in the room, and this isn't pretty much any different than most mature diversity and inclusion operations that are happening. How we measure it, what our goals are, somewhat changed, but these are kind of your major segments. Our journey at Intel, if you think about it, Intel started in 1968. Think about what was going on in this country in 1968, right? So I think Pfizer was up and talked about 166 years. I mean, we are, compared to that, still infants. The technology industry really began to grow. But if you look at our decade, the reason why I put this up here is because that was critical to Brian Krasanich being comfortable enough to put his legacy on the line on a stage in front of his peers. Because we didn't just start doing this. We actually started sharing our data 12 years ago. We actually started putting some of our goals in our corporate social responsibility report about 8 years ago. Nobody paid attention to it, but it was in there. How many eyeballs do you think are on that report we just published a couple months ago, right? So we've been doing it. Each one of these represented some level where we did something very specific in the diversity space. 2001, we actually established the diversity office. And then it took them about 3 years to convince me to take over and do the job. That's when I actually left the public affairs, corporate affairs world, went into human resources. And then we did a variety of things in terms, if you can see, 2002, we started sharing our data publicly. We did a huge women's study in 2009. So we, as an engineering scientific environment, have been looking at data, quantitative and qualitative, for over a decade. We knew what we were doing as far as how our employees were progressing. We had a deep dive analysis of the workforce, our own, and the workforce that was available to us. So when we were setting goals, we weren't just going like this. We were setting goals in rooms of scientists with data that even though we didn't like the data was real. So that allowed us in 2015 to get up on stage and say, not only are we committed to this, but we are going to go to another level of publishing data. You have to keep in mind that you had companies that had sued to keep their data public, finally starting to show a little bit of their data. You had companies that never shared anything about your data, and we had been sharing our EEO-1 for over 10 years, and we clearly got that clearly we weren't at full representation. So sharing data was not going to be enough, and we wanted to go deeper. We wanted to go deeper, number one, to show exactly what the gap was in our company, and we wanted to be able to share what the representation was of technical talent in this country. And so part of that was because we had been doing it for so long. The most important thing that people ask me is, how did you get Brian to get up on stage and really focus on a 2020 vision? And I said, because he was part of my diversity management committee for 4 years. He ran manufacturing. This is not a new concept to him. When he asked me what it would take, I said, well, we've been sharing our data. It's out there. I said, but this is the reality. We've been taking goals for a decade. We've been giving our leaders these goals for a decade. And every year, we have missed them for a decade. We've all been promoted for a decade. We're all still here for a decade. We also have our jobs for a decade. So if you actually believe this is critical to your business, this is not just about showing the data, it's about holding us accountable to the data. And so a huge reason why we went out publicly was not just to lead ourselves, but to lead an industry and hold ourselves and industry accountable. Because Intel, that's kind of what we do. We either lead or we don't. Sometimes that's great, sometimes that's challenging. We're not necessarily a company that gets in a room and says, okay, our goal is, let's be mediocre, let's be middle of the pack. We don't want to lead because that's hard. We don't want to lose because that's even harder. We generally want to lead because we generally are always at a place where we believe that we can. We believe that we can. And whatever you think about Reverend Jesse Jackson, he only asked BK for one thing, really, and it was to lead. Because he said, we think you're the ones that really can do it. And if Intel proves that you can actually close representation gaps in technology, then nobody will have an excuse. And so we really stepped back and said, what are we going to do? What is it going to take to achieve full workforce representation? And that was really the basis of going, number one, very deep with our data. There is no one inside of our company now that is confused about what we're after. We're on a journey to get everybody to be as committed and to believe in it in the same way. But there's nobody that will tell you they have no idea what we're doing around it. Everybody understands the 2020 goal. The transparency is important inside the company and outside the company. But we also recognize we have to grow the pipeline of technical talent. Right now, we don't know if all technical companies can reach full representation because the way we look at our data is very inconsistent, right? The way that we're held accountable based on percentage does not take into account how many jobs we all have. So Intel could reach full representation, but I don't know if 12 other companies can because we actually don't know if there's enough engineers and computer scientists to fill all of our jobs based on who's coming out of college. So we think that's one of the reasons why we'll continue to look for some level of standardization of our data. Right? Some level of a baseline that says this is what we stand for as an industry, and this is how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. Does that sound familiar? These worlds will collide. It is my prediction that we will begin to collide and learn from a lot of what we've done in the CSR space over the last decade in order to get some consistency in our operations. Growing the pipeline of technical talent, that's been huge for us. We've invested $1 billion in education over the last 10 years. We haven't seen more engineers and computer sciences rise as a result of that. And I think that's because we've been focused very much on long term. We had a speaker earlier today that said, hey, you have to have that vision for far out, but you have to do things with a sense of urgency that allows you to do some things right now. So the big game changer for us is we do have long-term strategies in education that primarily sits in the corporate affairs world, the new world that I own now. But in our diversity space, we're really saying, but what can we do to make a measurable difference in the number of graduates in 5 years? And that changes what you fund. It changes how you fund it, and it changes your goals. So when we went into Oakland Unified, and I'm meeting with their new president and everybody, I'm saying, okay, look, we want to place a big bet. We want to see if money and our resources can change the cohort within a cohort life cycle in high school, which means 4 years. And I remember getting ready to leave the meeting. They said, okay, we'll get back to you with the proposal next month. I said, oh, no. I said, I need it next week. This is a high school district, urban high school district, Oakland, California. I said, because we have to be ready to go by your freshman class. Because if we can't go by your freshman class, we've lost an entire cohort. They'd never experienced that before. They had never experienced a corporation coming in and saying, no, we're going to be a game changer here, but you're going to have to come with us quickly. What he told me was that thought process has impacted the entire way his team works, because now they've seen what they can deliver when they're on the line. Think about this. Think about what that next staff meeting probably was with them. Okay, Intel's going to give us $5 million a year, but I got to get something by next week. If one of you fails me, can you imagine what that, I mean, even this is a public school system, right? To say, no, we really believe in this, and we're going to rise to that. We don't know if it's going to work, but we've never done something like this. We've never done something with this level of depth and rigor with the public school system. A lot of times we've done it in an after-school community education setting, and that's good, but it's not going to deliver more young people getting ready to go to college to become what? Engineers and computer scientists. So that's really the game changer for us. The other thing was that we really did want to continue to get better. When we looked at our stats around our diversity in our supply chain, we're very proud of our conflict-free mineral stance, incredibly proud of that. When we looked at who we were investing in, who we were doing business with, we were woefully behind the industry. We had to step up. And we had to step up with what? Transparency of a goal. So we took the $1 billion goal. And then we really began to find out that we were behind in who we actually were investing in our venture capital. So again, we wanted a holistic point of view. And what was interesting about the issue with gaming, with women in gaming, and the wake-up call that we got when we really realized what type of harassment was going on in the platforms we create. I was inundated with email and phone calls. Our CEO was inundated. We had funded a movie. I was part of the team that brought Girl Rising. We had funded a movie which basically told countries how to treat its girls and women. And so this was going on. And what was interesting, and this gets into the CSR world, is, okay, I skew a little older. I've bought a lot of games. Haven't really played a lot of games. None of the people that were blowing up my email, posting on Facebook, calling me, were gamers. Who do you think they were? They could care less about gaming. This wasn't about gaming. This is about how we treat women and what we stand for. This is our employees sending emails to say, I can't believe that you're letting this go on. Raj, you're our chief diversity officer. Where have you been? These are people that wasn't about gaming. It was a gaming issue that transcended to a human rights corporate social responsibility issue. And it got directly into lack of representation of females in computer science, because who drives the development of gaming? It got directly into lack of representation. And that's why that became really important and why you see that on there. It's not so much about gamers as much as how important that industry is. And gaming is a huge part and drives a lot of our business from that standpoint. It uses very high-end technology. So we felt it was important to continue to have that be a focus. It's a platform that we help create. How that platform is used is important. So we did want to lead with transparency. I know, did you guys like print this out and study it and redline it? And I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to where they literally have printed it out. They have little Post-it notes with all the crap. I'm like, oh my gosh, like the textbook. I think I'm happy, I don't know. But this has become a game changer because it is so transparent. Many of my peers are like, how'd you get the lawyers? I said, well, the lawyers work for Brian, he's the CEO. And unfortunately or fortunately, the industry is mediocre in our data. Transparency sets us apart as being real about it and allows us to talk about what we're doing about it in ways that are real. And I think that's what you will continue to see. We're going to do it twice a year. We believe that transparency is critically important. I believe that the next wave of transparency is going to be around gender and race compensation. That's coming. I mean, it's already here, but if you think about all the things, and it's from Hollywood to tech to everything, compensation, how we pay. Now, our biggest challenge is our research says, if you go back to what Jennifer Lawrence, who, if any of you follow that, her whole thing was, it's my fault because I didn't negotiate. Our own research and external research will tell you that it starts from day of offer. Men tend to negotiate, women tend not to. And there also is, particularly in the external research, whether we believe it or not, an aspect that could be an unconscious bias with what men get offered based on a historical perception of head of household. But there is no data in our country that suggests, you look at the 2 wage earners, particularly with multicultural women, there's a lot of women that are head of household. So that model in our country is already done. When I go into China, and I did a lot of work with our women in China, think about the first generation of women that came into the workplace as they're the one child. When we say they're the head of household right now, they're the head of household. They are expected to earn to take care of their parents. So the whole issue of wage and diversity and transparency, I think, will transform how we interact and how we continue to focus on this issue in ways that will absolutely coincide with the CSR platform. So in the magazine, you actually have a lot of the data. They did an excellent job, thank you very much, for basically they just took our report and kind of gave you a snapshot. But basically, our goal is not just hiring, and it's not just the 300 million, even though that's what everybody focuses on, but it really is moving our workforce through. So we're tracking hiring, we're tracking retention, we're tracking progression. Because for the most part, at the higher levels of our company, about 74% of the time, people get there through internal progression and promotion. So you can't just we can't hire our way out of this. We can't retain our way out of this. We have to have all 3 levers working together. And it will be interesting to see how much, as the environment becomes much more mature on this, what they begin to ask us. What was interesting, right after we announced at CES, I got a phone call from our CFO. Actually, it wasn't a phone call, it was an email, and then he called me on my cell because I was a little confused. And we had big companies like BlackRock wanted to talk to us about our diversity announcement. And I thought it was, oh wow, are they kind of concerned? Maybe that's going to impact stock price. I didn't know, it's our CFO. And he said, no, they actually think this is a good thing. And they were asking, it was the number one thing they've been asking in their meetings. Remember, this is after earnings. Like, they keep asking, and Roz, now I realize my people can't answer that. That's probably a problem moving forward, but until we get smart, I need you to come into these meetings. That was an interesting, so think about that for a minute. I'm a little diversity lady, and all of a sudden I'm in meetings of people that are making decisions that impact our business in big ways, and they want to talk about diversity. I'm sure you guys have experienced that in CSR before, right? And even Michael Jacobson, who does a great job, and Linda, who's on his team sitting right here. It was an interesting kind of moment where I stepped back and said, okay, now we're getting somewhere. It kind of felt like, I was in the room in a meeting at Intel probably 14 years ago where we were trying to figure out what CSR meant. Right? True. So to come back and where we are now, so it kind of took me to a place where, okay, we are really getting mature on this. I used to say on diversity, we're kind of doing basic math, and the day after CES, we were in calculus, and we're in AP calculus now. That's the journey that's happened so quickly. So we've talked about grow the pipeline. We absolutely are doing this. This is where a lot of the money is going. It's the traditional types of things with a slant. We recognize that scholarships and fellowships were a huge part of what was helping us grow our pipeline, so we're doubling down on that. The difference is this is not a philanthropic contribution anymore. This is a business investment because we actually are tying it to internships. And we're tying it to letters of intent. We can't force them, we don't want to force them, or be much more intentional. So if you think what we're doing is we're taking $300 million and saying over the next 5 years, in the 5 areas that I talked about, can we make a measurable difference with money, people, goals, and results to move this needle in a way we haven't been able to do it over the last 10 years. The supply chain, we're already seeing, just the fact that we took a goal and just the fact that we're measuring a goal. In our culture, that's huge. That's a huge, it's not all we have to do, but without it, we can't move the needle. So that really just gets us to catch up to where we believe we should be. But within that is a lot of work, as you guys know, to move that forward. We talked about women in gaming. And I think what we're seeing here, particularly with our employees, is a sense of, okay, we are walking our own talk. One of the things that I think impacted Brian so much was the feedback, not just from our female employees, but from our male employees. This was broad feedback all around the world. When you tell your employees you care and you stand for something and your actions are inconsistent, that will come back. And so in this manner, we have felt really good about how we have responded. But there are continued challenges because diversity and inclusion, as you know, continues to be a really murky topic. And people come to it with their own life experiences that either allow them to understand it and believe in it or not. Unconscious bias is the new wave that's come out now, and we did our first unconscious bias training 7 years ago. And what we realized was we have to keep doing it, but the reality is that until we as adults are in diverse environments where we are forced to practice the new learning, we actually don't role model the new learning. So it's both. One of the reasons why we're driving critical mass as a strategy, which is hiring goals, promotion goals, retention goals, is because when you drive to more critical mass, you are then presented with the foundation of an opportunity to actually drive change. So, I was supposed to leave you 5 minutes for questions. You have 4 minutes and 26 and counting seconds. All right, how are we going to do this? There's mics. I see hands over there, and then we'll come to the middle of the room right there.
Hi, thank you so much. That was wonderful. One of the things that I always wonder about is, among D&I officers, is there a distinction made between culture and ethnicity? I'll give you my own personal example. Genetically, I am probably the most South American Indian you will find in the room. Culturally, I am probably the least Latino person you will find in the room. When people start turning on bachata, I'm like, could you change that to Johnny Cash? So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
So,
Thanks so much.
It's interesting. There's a lot of intersectionality going on between race and gender, socioeconomic, geography. So this is the way that I would answer that. We absolutely have goals based on ethnicity and gender, right? We also have goals in South Africa. We also have goals in Malaysia. We have goals where the country either allows us to have goals or ensures that we do. Where culture comes into play a lot of times is in our employee resource groups. And it also is a lot with our councils. Let me give you an example. So our employee resource group is the network of Intel African American employees. Our leadership council is the Intel Black Leadership Council because there were many that did not grow up in the country. Where I think we have to figure out is, as I've done, kind of, you go to that next level and you think, okay, so let's talk about the diverse leaders who have made it to, I can see myself at my grade level on the spreadsheet of 100,000 people, right? Because I'm a woman and I'm Black and I'm not technical. There's somebody else that sees herself, okay? So we're very different. I grew up in this country, she didn't, right? Different socioeconomic, she different. That plays out a lot of times in how we lead. It's hard to get to that level in tech when you have, Blacks are not even 4% of our entire 100,000 employees. Hispanics are a little bit less than 8%. We saw that when we've done conferences where, under the Hispanics, right, you've got many races underneath Hispanics. We see it a lot in where we go recruit. So part of diversity and inclusion is really ensuring that we aren't just hiring the same box. You can be different as long as you fit in the same box. And that's when I say you go from basic math to calculus. It's hard to get there when you don't have critical mass. Where we're able to get there quicker, in all honesty, is with Caucasian and Asian women because there are more of them. It's very hard to get there, at least for us, but it is the next wave, I think. And I think that's where some of the unconscious biases and stereotypes come in. Yes.
Hi, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I was wondering how you're anticipating dealing with the challenges that will inevitably come up along, down the line, and especially when you start talking about compensation. So I was just wondering if you sort of have some how you're anticipating dealing with those challenges.
Well, we're already dealing with them. This is what I'll tell you that I think most, if you go talk to human resources, I think if it wasn't happening in diversity, it's going to happen with millennials. They share everything. Everything. And we have millennials that absolutely compare starting salaries now. They do. They compare it with their parents. Their parents get together. I mean, so we think, again, my personal take is that I think on compensation, many of us are where we were 10 years ago on diversity data. And I do believe that over time, and we have been thinking about it, we aren't there yet of whether or not we should just go. You're right. Because, and this is what's interesting, we've been doing compensation audits, deep compensation audits for about 7 years. We all legally, most of you have to do them now, probably 3 years ago. So we're comfortable, again, it's kind of the same as our diversity data. We're really comfortable with what our data is. Like, I'd be fine sharing all the data. I think we'd be really good. Really, seriously. But we also want to be very thoughtful about that and what that means. So I think it's the next wave. I don't think we're here yet, but I do think we as organizations are going to be forced to go there. And I always believe it's better for us to step up and go before a monitoring or audit agency makes us go. But I do think that's the next wave of transparency that I think we're going to see. And I'm out of time, so I can go maybe 5 more minutes, so I want to be respectful of you guys as well. Who's got the mic? Ooh.
I'd like your observation on whether or not we actually want more people, men or women, boys or girls, in gaming. I mean, having raised kids through that, it was generally not, from a parent's perspective, all that positive a part of their growing up.
So this is what I would say. My personal perspective is not about whether or not they're in gaming. It's the fact that it's people with computer science, technical skills and capability who are running that industry. So do I want more girls in computer science? Yeah. Do I want more girls that come up with their own gaming company that might find new ways to engage girls productively? Yeah. That's my own personal take. It's not about more people in gaming, but it is about ensuring that those that are in gaming are in harassment-free zones, that they can go in and experience the joy, and that hopefully we engage with girls in a different way. When we drove the Intel Computer Clubhouse Network, which was the project I started at Intel, what we found is girls are storytellers. A lot of the young boys, they just wanted to figure out how to use the Adobe and Macromedia software to blow things up. And what girls wanted to do was they wanted the story. Right? And so what we found is when we put girls with boys, they actually did movies, they actually did video games, and those video games solve world problems. So I think there's some aspect of that, and I think that's what we're striving to do, is ultimately that's about building computer science skills for the competitiveness of our nation. Does that help? Okay, I think am I getting the, see, he looks nice, he's got the suit on, but sorry, I am real easy to find. Linda's here tomorrow, and I wish I could stay longer, but I'm juggling both jobs. But thank you very much. I love talking about it, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys next year. Thank you.